Sure.
All right.
All right.
Fire us up.
Actually, hold on. Okay, no, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead.
Are you okay?
Yeah, go
All right.
ahead.
You'll never have the sacred stone.
Oh, this you crazy mother.
Number one intro is done. We are into Hearthstone, episode 5. You guys might be wondering that listen to it via iTunes or something else audio. Why hasn't something else dropped since episode 2? That's quite simply because I have not updated the data storage on Libsyn quite yet. I did not anticipate bringing out 3 to 4 extra podcasts in the course of 2 weeks. So there's a slight backlog on things that need to be added. I will probably get those up, but this one will most likely go up prior. So you'll see episode 5 and then some combination of 3 and 4. I am Yubi. I am joined by Rise. Say hello, my friend.
Hey, welcome back, everybody.
And the man formerly known as Primal, who now is known as...
Original. Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello. And prior to this, you guys played a game, and I found it rather interesting for a variety of reasons. But I think it'd be better if you guys talk about the ins and outs, since not only were you guys playing it, but you're pretty intimately familiar with the decks that you've created. And I'd like to start with you, Rise, because I know it's a deck that you have been working on for several weeks trying to perfect.
This deck, I was playing on my block about, I'm going to say a good couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's about rank 9 or so, and this warrior shows up. And I'm like, all right, I've got, it's going to be a warrior, it's going to be a patron warrior or something like that, or it's going to be an ass warrior, like one of these ones that show up. I'm sure there's a better name for it, but that's what I usually call them. And it seems fine at first. It's like, oh, there's lots of weapons, and there's lots of armor and so forth. And partway through the game, just a car shows up. I'm like, oh, that's going to give him a lot of extra armor. That's a pain in the butt, but all right, whatever. And the thing was, like, the warrior wasn't really going after me. Like, it was clearing my board of my minions. I was having a really hard time trying to keep control of the board, but he really wasn't, like, making any kind of impact on me. Like, not going face that much, holding weapons back like a good warrior does, unless they see an opportunity. It was like, it wasn't that big a deal. I'm like, all right, well, whatever. But I just felt like, this game's not slipping out of my control, but it's not going so hot. And about 2/3 of the way through the game, the oracles show up. The Murlocs, I can't remember what it is, the Cold Light Oracle, which makes both sides draw 2 cards. Typically, you see that in a mill deck. You don't usually see that anywhere else, actually. There's not any real point for that. But especially as a Warlock, I'm like, all right, I'm already drawing something fierce. That's my hero power. Now I'm in trouble because I've just had a draw forced. And I got into fatigue in short order, but it was weird because there were no other cards in the deck that other than he had a Death Lord in there which did some card draw, but it wasn't like there were no dancing swords, there were no brewmasters to send cards back out and then back in again. It was just a weird deck, but it destroyed me. I'm like, this is a brilliant deck. This is a great way to do this. So I tried to friend the guy, and he didn't respond. But I was like trying to recreate what happened with this deck, and I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to refine the finer points of how do you get a warrior deck put together that seems like it's one thing, but actually is something else. I've learned a lot of good lessons about deck building, and I'd love to get into that in this cast. But the main point of this particular warrior deck. I can't remember if you original were the one that gave the name of this a survival warrior, or that was you. I don't know where that name came from, but that's really what this is. It's a survival warrior. It's not necessarily a mill deck because you don't need the other person to play a lot of cards or extra, but it's basically intended just to trade up. It's intended to be the type of deck where you use a lot of weapons and a lot of armor to get the most value out of your deck, just that little bit more than your opponent to maintain control of the board. And by the time you get to the end of the game, when there's only a couple cards left for your opponent, that's when you really start to come through with your extra stuff. The final, getting the last couple of cards figured out to what's going to be best for this deck was really what made this deck come through for me. And right now I'm playing around between rank 12 and 10 as I'm learning how to pilot this deck. But it's a different kind of deck, and I'm always looking for that in Hearthstone because you can even though there's this prejudice against net decking, and I'm a big fan of net decking, I think that net decking is a great way to, like, putting a deck together is hard. It's hard for me trying to figure out what the synergies is. Taking someone else's constructed deck, learning how to play it, and then from there making the tweaks that you think make an impact either in the current meta or to basically just figure out how certain decks run, I think is great. I think it's a great idea.
In a sense, I think as far as opponents to net decking, as far as the three of us go, I'm probably at the top of that. But in the same sense, net decking and then tweaking it to make your own is almost like taking the twinking of Warcraft and putting it in the Hearthstone sense.
Yeah,
Take
very
what
much
you
so.
know and make it work to fit, and this might sound kind of strange, your play style.
Even more than that, what other people are playing and counter that.
Yes.
For
Yes.
example, there's stuff like on the ladder, at one point I had to run double keys on Mystic because everyone was playing Secret Pally. Or Mage. You just had to adapt to what other people are playing and see what you can remove out of your deck.
Yeah.
To
I think that's a great point, and you're going to hit points, and you guys are much more experienced with this than I, so I'm kind of parroting things that you've told me. But you'll get to certain points in the ladder where it's, Christ, all I'm facing is, like, let's say Secret Pally. And if you're running the deck that, say, got you from 20 to 9, and all you're facing at, say, 9 to 7 are Secret Pallies, well, that might not still be a suitable deck. You need to figure out a way to work past that, get to 6, and then what? Will that same deck keep you going? Or then do you need to formulate a sort of new plan, a new option, and a new deck strategy to continue moving down?
That's spot on. That's and I was laughing my ass off originally. You're like 2 Kazans, because I'm like, 2 Kazans? Who does that? And then I was just like, well, you face hunters, mages, pallies, which is like 80% of what you'll see on the ladder right now. I'm like, that's pretty much that. You'll be in great shape.
Yeah.
Stealing all the secrets. It makes a big difference.
I have a really good picture. I myself was actually playing a mid-range hunter with secrets. I was talking about this in previous casts, and I call it a Christmas tree since it's like green red.
Yes.
Since you're on that Loki's and Mystic and you steal other people's secrets.
Oh my goodness, that's something I've read about too. Where it's nice to think about if I can just put together the perfect deck, this awesome deck, or hey, Colento plays this amazing deck that can like blow the doors off of everything. I'm like, well, there's some truth to that, but what really happens in Hearthstone, especially on the ladder, is that you'll be facing clumps of decks. You'll be rank 17, and you'll see a clump of locks, or a clump of pallies that play a certain way, or a clump of net decks. The particular like sediment layer that you're in on the ladder will look a certain way. Sometimes that means trading out a couple of cards. If you're facing a ton of pallies, a ton of warriors, rogues are showing up, it's time to break out the acidic swampoos. Get something that busts up weapons.
Get
You may
Harrison out.
Or Harrison, if you happen to have that in there. You know, it's like having some trouble with card draw, seeing a lot of weapons. Harrison's here to help out.
Yeah. Back in season 4, had to stop playing hand blocks since everyone was killing my Jiraxis with Harrison.
Okay, can I tell a quick side note? I was telling Rise about this. I recently made a new chamois deck, almost just to kill Rise, and it seems to be working okay so far. But I put in Harrison just because I know he's playing a ton of weapons. I go up against a lock, drops Jiraxis, perfect position to win. He's got almost a full hand. I have 2 cards left. I play Harrison Jones.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
And, well, let's just say the game kind of turned pretty goddamn quickly.
And it's such a great feeling when you can make those little alterations to your deck that make such a big impact. The game should have been over, and then all of a sudden you hear the tires screeching on the scoreboard as things just turn around right in that moment. You can almost feel it, like just the world sinks on the other side of the board right there. You know, you got it. You pulled it off.
All of a sudden you see the emotes come out where it's well played. But they don't really mean well played. It says sarcastic F you, well played. Like,
That's
oh, well played,
exactly
dude. Well played, dude. God damn it, well played.
I've had opponents where it's just like, I thought they're roping me. They're just like, they're letting that rope last forever. And I'm like, oh, come on, do you really need to do this? And then like the next turn comes around and then the innkeeper pops up, your opponent left. And I'm like, wow. After I played that card, he literally just shut off Hearthstone.
There have been times, I'm actually guilty of this a lot in Hearthstone, where if I go from, say, winning to losing in a single turn, and I'm especially bitter about it because there were some, of those obviously sarcastic emotes that fall, I won't concede, and I'll just say, you know what? If you're going to be a dick, I'm going to be a dick in the best way I know how, and that is make you wait as long as possible.
And there it is. That happens. Which is probably a good thing why there's no chat as all emotes, because...
No, that actually probably is a great thing.
Yeah, that keeps things a lot less toxic. But so that's my warrior.
I actually probably won't play this game if I chat.
There it is. I think that, Original, if you could go into some of the control warrior construction that you were doing, I'd love to hear more about that, because that's something where we're seeing more control warrior decks on there, but some of the variations inside that I think would be really helpful.
Right. Okay, so control warrior is a really strange beast, since there's so many ways to change it, but all the decks are still the same, even though they're all different. They're all different, but they're all the same. Like, there's a couple cards that you have to run, but you don't know how many you have to run of them. Like, you don't actually have to run double Abusive Sergeant, or whatever, or, Cruel Taskmaster.
Mm-hmm.
You don't actually have to run 2 of each card. And it's just, like, so weird, since, like, I think the only deck in the game where there's literally just no set way to play it, but you still call it Control Warrior,
There seems to be a lot more variability in the deck construction, where it's like, you can run with 1 of these, you can run with 2 of these. And it's like, you can say that for half the cards in the deck, as opposed to the other end of the scale, where it's like, look, if you're running an aggro hunter, if you're doing a face hunter, about 24 of your cards, maybe 26 are set in stone. You get to choose the last 4 depending on what you feel like.
Yeah. It's like, you can be a control warrior. It's really just your own playstyle. I really, really like it. It's probably one of, if not my favorite decks. Even though I have played Warlock since forever, it is my favorite. And I think that mainly because you have so much variation of what you can choose.
Mm-hmm.
And just like, you can change your deck so frequently and so many times and still like it be the same deck,
So kind of like what I was saying before, where when you're going through the ranks, you might need to say change your class or throw in these other cards and stuff. You don't even need to change your class if you want to take Control Warrior from, the land of the noob to the promised land of the legend. Like, technically, if you can play the deck right, you can still play that Control Warrior style, but switch in different cards to suit wherever you're at in the decks you're facing.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of experimentation, being able to figure out what fits not only the meta and what fits your deck, but what fits your play style in there in a given context. All those factors come into to take a part in how you put your deck together. And that was one of the things I've really had to struggle with in these last couple of weeks in putting this warrior deck together. Is there are cards. One of the real challenges in constructing a deck, and I want to segue into deck construction here, is that with all the, especially now, so many different cards available, so many different things you can do, finding cards that play well off of each other. It's a lot easier to do that, but it's the little things about these cards that make a big deal as far as, does a particular card fit in your deck or not? Like, one of the things I was thinking of is, as a warrior, as a survival warrior, the worst thing I have to deal with is a lot of small minions. If Pallies break out the muster, or if Warlocks break out the implosion, Shamans with their totems, that's actually more difficult for a survival warrior, because you have a couple of clears. You have your whirlwinds and so forth, but they're only 1-point clears. And once you're done with that, that's it. You have Brawl, but you don't want to use Brawl on a bunch of 1-point minions, especially as often as they pump out.
Well,
so that was the issue.
Cards like Baron Geddon comes in.
Yeah, exactly. So you need something like Baron Geddon that takes up a slot. So at first I was thinking, you know what? I'll take advantage of that, and I'll use a Sea Giant, because a Sea Giant becomes dirt cheap if you have a bunch of minions on the board. So I thought that was a great idea, and I played with a Sea Giant. It was a total disaster. And the reason is, yes, the Sea Giant's cheaper, but in a Warlock deck where the Sea Giant's already backed up by a bunch of small minions, it's strong. You can make a difference there. When it's one of the only minions on the board, having a single 8/8 when there's like a bunch of 1/1s or a bunch of 2/1s or a bunch of whatever in there, that Giant's going down in a hurry. You're not even like getting much value out of that.
You are a cake in the middle of a hungry group of people.
Oh, it's awful. It's awful. So it made sense. I can get a cheap Giant out of that, but cheap isn't what I needed. I needed something else besides that. And I realized that, okay, well, that's the way to go. Then I need something. Cheap's not the issue. So I went with a Clockwork Giant instead. I was like, all right, I'm going to have a Giant in there because it's going to be a Clockwork Giant is cheaper based on how many cards the other person plays. It was the same problem in a different context. I get a bunch of cards on the board, cards on the field. They've got 8-9 cards. Even on a handlock, who had like a full hand in there, I've got a cheap Giant. Cheap Giant by itself is not enough. You can't play Giants on their own. So that was, it's like, okay, that's not going to work. What I ended up going with instead, to my surprise, I've never played Emperor Thaurissan, but what I really needed was a minion that was worth going after, but wasn't necessarily a taunt. Emperor Thaurissan, even if I have trash in my hand, which I say trash like it just wasn't appropriate for that turn, my opponent doesn't know that. But Emperor Thaurissan is one of the scariest cards in the game because you know that if you let it live for more than one turn, something disastrous in their hand could get very cheap very fast. Well, so it acts like a taunt.
You absolutely have to get rid of that. I cannot think of a deck, and maybe original you know of one, where it's okay to just be like, you know what? Let's let the Amp live, dude. He seems like a chill dude.
Face. You don't have to trade ever. You just go face all game and win.
Okay, yes, I forgot the
one exception, the perennial exception.
The one thing
you still trade as Face Hunter, but yeah, it's just an insane card. Yeah.
I've done that as Face Hunter. I've let Emperor go, and that's been to my demise.
It has. It really has.
You can't. Even Face Hunter, if you're playing it, you have to kill the Emperor. You cannot afford to let that go.
And for people that don't know what Emperor is, think of, oh, Christ, what's the 2/3 mech warper? And mech warper, while it's on the board, will make every mech in your hand cost 1 less. If you drop the Emperor, every card in your hand at the end of your turn costs 1 less, and that's permanent.
End of turn. That's insane.
End of turn. Yes. Yeah, not even beginning of the next turn. It's end of the turn.
So you're guaranteed at least one benefit. So let's say you let it go and you have something like Ysera in there. You let it go twice, all of a sudden that's 7. What if you're playing a Chamois? What if you put Ancestral Spirit on it? You know, like, think of the different combination of cards that you can play if you just take away 1 mana cost from 2 of them.
Yeah. If you have a 7-card cost and a 3-card cost and a 3-card cost, that's not going anywhere. If the Emperor shrinks that to 6, 2, and 2, you can play all 3 cards in the same turn the very next turn.
Yeah. Emperor is in the same card. Every deck
assuming
play,
you have 10
except for aggro. Aggro doesn't play it since you're supposed to not have a large hand. But pretty much every mid-range...
Every non-aggro deck.
Every non-aggro deck, yeah. Well, is like pretty much mandatory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go onto that spin-off of deck construction into more deck construction, which is the use of using abilities or crafted cards when you're behind or when you're ahead, or just like solid cards.
Yes.
Since that's a big deal in decks. Like, there's obviously tech cards like BGH and Kazan Mystic where you're predicting something, but you don't want to play cards like Sea Giant or Clockwork Gnome where you want a set of events to actually happen, or to be ahead in a certain case to be able to play a card. That unless you have something to play off it, like Implosion for Warlock, like you can get a full board instantly, which is fine. Or if you're playing a Warrior Shield Slam, usually it's like only when you're ahead, but you have a lot of cards where you can armor up. You don't want to play cards where you rely on being ahead to play. Yeah. That's just not good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, you go ahead.
No, that puts you in a situation. There's a lot of opportunities where Hearthstone gives you cards where you can combo off each other to capitalize on a lead, and that's all well and good. Like that's great. There is such a thing as a finisher. There is such a thing as being able to really put your damage or just basically put your board position over the top, such that you can just finish off the game. And if you played Hearthstone for a while, you've come across that game that you thought were like, oh, I've got this game in the bag, and then all of a sudden it gets turned around on you, and you're like, oh, man, if I just had that little bit more. That's true, but getting into that situation, and I find is a lot less common than getting in a situation where you're like, okay, how do I get out of this? How do I buy myself the time I need to get the cards I need? How do I turn this around? And if you don't have cards that are positioned to do that, if you haven't comboed them, if you haven't set up your deck such that they can combo off of each other to be able to make that save or to be able to regain power on the board or to regain presence, what ends up happening is you end up playing cards not getting the most value out of them. You end up playing offensive card defensively, you don't get the most value, and that's a slippery slope. That's when you start doing things where you start playing cards that were meant to capitalize on something, but you're just throwing it out there for a body to hit so that you hope that the next card can be a body to hit so that you hope that the next card, and then just gets away from you.
So are there...
I don't want to... Okay, go.
Well, I was going to say, are there several different levels to that? And one would be creating a deck which has some sort of synergy, but also knowing what card to play and when to do so.
Yeah, I was about to talk about that, actually.
Oh, that's a perfect segue to you then.
There are a couple of decks which can get away with this. First things which come to mind, Druid, Mage, and I'm going to say Priest. Because they have the utilities to play a Force of Nature Savage Roar, or a Freeze Mage until you get... what's it called? Until you get Archmage and just like completely kill your opponent in one turn. But those cards, they're strong. Don't get me wrong, but they feel gimmicky and they're just RNG.
Like you said, for Freeze Mage, you don't want to freeze until you get the Doomsayer, then you get Alexstrasza, and then you can do your thing.
Yeah, which is what you do, and I guess it's good in competitive play, but I just don't. It's not. Unless you're insanely good, it's not something you should play. You should just play solid decks which have no win condition and can win without the use of one cards. That's where decks like Control Warrior are so strong, because is playing Viridian Rain and getting a Ragnaros and a Gramash off that really good. But it's not a win condition. You just play strong cards frequently and get to a winning conclusion.
I really like that term win condition, and I feel like Rise, that's something you and I have spoke about. I'm pretty sure we've used that term on a few occasions as well. And I guess I just kind of cut you off, but I guess run on that win condition sort of thing.
No, it's a perfect setup, original. That's win condition. I read about and I see decks. They're like, well, it sets you up with this win condition, or once you get this particular combo of cards, you're going to win. Anytime I hear the phrase win condition, to me, that's an opportunity for a comeback. When you set up if you have a deck that depends on certain cards appearing at a certain time, that is a weakness of the deck, not a strength. And if you have to either wait for those cards to appear or you have to play them together, chances are, if your opponent's watching what you're doing, there's a good chance they're saving the counter for you. That's for the reason that we have a big game hunter running around in a lot of decks, or it's the reason that someone's got a silence in a lot of decks.
Bird!
There it is. Oh my god, I love Hoopers. All it takes is one silence in a deck, and it nukes like a third of the decks that I run into because they're dependent on a win condition of some sort of combo effect. And I see that's some of the reasons why I feel like Mysterious Challenger is such a gimmicky part of
Leroy.
Well, at least that had a chance to just go boom.
Yeah.
Right, and there it is. So it's like, if you've got something where you know what it's going to happen, and it looks like it just from the card setup, where it's like, where you can see just by how the deck is playing out that you're like, all right, that guy just played. This happens with Patron Warriors, Where like by this time, if you when you get partway through a warrior deck and a couple minions show up, where it's like, okay, well, this is not a control warrior deck. That's a couple of small minions. It especially happens with card draw. When you see a lot of card draw on a warrior, when they early on, it's like, okay, that's a lot of card draw. They're looking to just rush your face off. You know, to save your board clear, they're going to whirlwind. They're going to use their death spite axe to just multiply their warriors like crazy. You're going to take 20 damage to the face, and if you have a board clear, it's over. You've got them. You've got the counter. All of a sudden, now you've got 10 health. They've got 30, but they have an empty board.
Yeah.
You're waiting for the counter. This is the danger of a win condition. The strongest decks are the ones that don't have a win condition, but set up the optimal chances for you to take advantage of situations. Not if, but when a weak turn comes around for you.
Well, and you know what, Rise? This is one thing I really like about the deck you're working towards. Because while we've called it survival, I think it's one of the most adaptable decks that at least I've seen amongst like our group of, I don't know what you want to call us, our Hearthstone clan or our Hearthstone guild of friends that play. Because it really is, it's dependent upon what the other person does, and it's adaptable to many different situations. If someone wants to go long, more often than not, that works in your favor. If someone wants to go short, you also have some conditions that are able to adapt to that and either force it to go long or capitalize on a misplay or their aggressiveness.
I love it for that. That's one of the reasons I love playing Lock. Lock is, as a class, because they've got the card draw there, if they want to sit back and build up, they can do that. If someone rushes a Lock, depending on how you've put your Lock deck together, there's a lot of short-term answers to that can buy you some time before you get into your long-term game. And by long-term game, it doesn't have to be 7 turns. It can be 4 or 5 turns after a rush at 2 or 3. So that's why I loved Lock as a class. And to see Warrior be able to do that with this deck has been a lot of fun. And like originally, like you were saying, there are so many options with Warrior decks now. It's so much more, to me, maybe it's just because this is my inexperience with Warriors, but the versatility and flexibility of Warrior decks far exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, this is my first time really playing Warrior. Like, actually playing it. Like, I used to dabble in it a little, but this is the first time I actually put my nose down, disenchant all my cards, and made a really good deck. And I have enjoyed it a lot. It's really, really a good class. I enjoy it so much because of that.
Well, it is insane because you can go something as crazy as what I call the Duggars, which would be the Patron, because, you know, they just spawn so goddamn many.
Get in here.
And then you can go Control, and I'm sure there's multiple aggro versions, I'm not sure of, and everything in between. And can you guys think of another class in Hearthstone currently that offers the amount of variability or the amount of options for play styles that Warrior currently has?
Up until this expansion, I would have said Priest, but after this expansion drop, there's Dragon Priest, and then there's not exactly.
I think the problem is that Priest was never good, you know? I don't think Priest was good before this expansion. And I think it's just that now that we actually have like such a strong deck, it looks that way, you know? So I guess you could say that there's so many different ways to play a Priest, but were they actually good? I don't know.
Well, you know what I think, talking about Priest, is that everyone has been dry-fisted by several different versions of Priest decks at least once in their Hearthstone life, and that makes them think they're insane. Like, who has not played a Priest, had all of their best cards stolen, and then died to them?
Yeah.
Who has not played a Priest and just seen a minion's health double, attack equal, and then triple, quadruple, whatever? And I'm not trying to say it's the best deck, but I'd be willing to bet most people have had that happen to them at least once. And they're like, well, Priest, F Priest, F Priest. I can't tell you how many times when Hearthstone first started that I would talk with Dahlia Rise. Like, I would like every single person that plays Priest to die in a fire slowly. And it wasn't necessarily it was the best deck. It was just what I was saying. Like, they were taking my cards and killing me with them. And a lot of it had to do with the fact I just wasn't very good. But it did also have a lot to do with the fact that my cards were killing me. And there's a special sort of anger / frustration that occurs from such events.
Yeah, it was it was really frustrating to play a priest like that. Months ago, Dahlia sent me a link to Reddit. I'm just pulling it up here. There's a post called "Priest Tech Your Way to Legend," and it talks about the different aspects of priests, basically grouped cards into packs. And it's a really great description of what you can do with a priest to be able to put together kind of pods of cards, depending on what your play style was, what you're looking for, how you want to do that. And that's why I say priest had a lot of versatility. But originally, you make a good point where it's like you really had to be able to leverage that pretty perfectly against some of the decks that would come through.
Yeah.
And I remember.
What about? Or I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, and the meta at the time meant that, well, you can be a really awesome priest player, but it was hard to, like, if you don't get the right mulligan, you could be in real trouble against a
Yeah,
face.
I think at one point the only person who actually played priest and was legend was Colento, and Colento was like the best player in the world, or something. You know?
Yeah.
It's just.
Yeah, it was a very high skill cap class, and part of my high skill cap in Hearthstone that includes just to deal with the fact that there's some RNG involved.
There
More
is.
simple than that.
What about Warlock, though? Because Warlock had several different things. You could go Handlock, you could go the Sea Giant, you could go Jiraxis. Was that another thing, another deck that offered different options? Or is there really just one that's always dominated? Oh, and let's not forget Murloc at the very dawn of Hearthstone.
And Handlock.
Yeah, I thought I said that,
And
but if I missed it, I'm sorry.
And Demon Lock.
I feel like Warlock had maybe
Did you say Morlock? Are we in H.G. Wells' time machine, or are we talking Murloc?
I don't know what I said, but if I said the idea of a Murloc with lock on the end of that, just like the vision that conjures up, is pretty close to awesome. Like there should be this evil cackle Murloc laugh, which I can't even attempt to imitate right now. But the priest, goodness, priest too, but Warlock I feel like had 2 or 3 main archetypes where, yeah, there was some variation in there, but you were basically playing a rush deck, a control deck, or a handlock. That was your big 3. I don't really remember seeing anything else other than those 3. And there might be small variations, like, well, maybe you play the imp that gives you 1 health every turn, or maybe you play the sea giant. Maybe you stick in a BGH, maybe you don't. Maybe you play the molten giants because you know you're going to get low on health.
That's true.
That's actually one thing.
Well, I think the only difference is that it's like so. I think the difference is that the cards in Warlock are just so like radically different. Like just one card makes such a huge difference. I think it's the only card in the game which actually does that. Like Mal'Ganis and Jiraxis. I think those are the 2 most prevalent cards in the game which actually do that. You know?
Yeah, I guess there was a whole thing when we were doing the podcast with HB where I was like, Jiraxis does math, and you got that rise and you transferred it. So I thought that gave me a silent giggle that I couldn't actually laugh about during the cast. But it kind of also made me think that the fact that Blizzard designed it so, and people figured out very quickly, that a good way to win as a Warlock is to lose your health fast.
Yeah.
And that kind of ties back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the cast, where like the twinking sort of Hearthstone. And maximizing what you're doing. Because I remember playing people like, dude, I am lighting this mofo up. All of a sudden, I see a couple of giants drop. Oh, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
I remember watching a Hearthstone tournament, and I don't remember who it was. It was the semifinals of some tournament. A guy had a Warlock down to 14 health. Or it was like 16 health or 14 health. It was right around in there, right? And he left damage on the board. It's like, well, he could attack him, and the announcer was like, well, that was a really good move, so that he didn't get him down to
12.
You want to get him into molten range. Exactly. And I thought, you're a dumbass. Even I don't leave damage on the board. And then when the announcer said that, I was like, oh, I would have been the dumbass that would have died. And sure enough, when you're looking at the cast of this tournament, you saw that he had a molten giant just waiting for that extra damage to come through. That's a smart player. Where it's like, yeah, There was a while in Hearthstone where if you're going against a Warlock, because they were prevalent, you basically figured that you want to get him to about 15 or 14 health, and then after that, you're pretty much counting you need to get a kill shot in.
Wait, you know what we need,
Because
Raz?
if you can't get them all down
that
after
win
that...
condition.
Yeah. Bring it back.
There it is. So, and maybe that's a good point, that maybe win conditions were a more dependable thing back in earlier days.
I think so. There was less tech cards. There was different ways. It was different meta. There was no Emperor. It was just like lots of the cards back then were just like good cards with like, and all the charge cards were insane. Like all the class cards were more aggro than control.
Yeah, there was a lot more culmination back in the games back then. Now because there are more ways to recover, because there are more ways to combo and be able to go offense or defense, it's not as reliable to do this big build-up and then finish it off. There's more comeback ways now, which I think makes it for a better game. It's a more fun game that way. Well,
and I think that with the Grand Tournament expansion, they have succeeded in slowing down the pace. And I feel like I'm going to get some resistance from either one or two or everyone and people that aren't even in here are going to be like, no, you're wrong. But I really think they have. And it's been in ways, I mean, I guess the most obvious way they want to do it was through the joust mechanic. We talked in past podcasts about how that hasn't actually worked out all that well, especially if you have Nozdormu down, then you just lose a turn.
Well, yeah, but it's also slow down the game because you have to watch the joust mechanic.
Yeah. But just in the way the cards are, in the way things have developed, I mean, original hearing you say, I'm enjoying a mid-range hunter.
Yeah.
I was like dancing for joy on my roof, like, Phase Hunter's going to die. Of course, that's not going to be 100% true, but at least there's another option.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that's true, and it's I don't have the actual stats on that. You'd have to go to a site to see what the typical game length is and so forth. But I would bet that even though the typical game length is probably only expanded by a couple of turns, I would put that only in quotes because games ran fast before. There were a lot of more aggro decks. There was a lot more going, especially near the end of the expansion when Pally aggro decks became a thing. So you had the possibility of Warlock aggro. You definitely saw Hunter aggro all over the place. You could have Mech Shamans go crazy if they wanted to. There's just a lot. There were a lot of race decks.
But
let's just
also,
go crazy.
Let's not kid the difference between a game that goes to 7 or a game that goes to 9, that's significant.
Significant. Yeah. It really is. It really is. It changes the way that the game plays just because it opens up a lot more possibilities for the cards. And I think that's how the meta shifted.
I think the best...
Go ahead.
I think a good way to realize that is it's a pretty simple idea, but once you hit 10 mana, you don't keep on getting mana crystals. You stay at 10 mana. And that sort of like crafts the game. And the more you think about that, you're like, oh, that's sort of like changes how you play the game. The longer it goes, it sort of like flattens. The curve stops. Yeah. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, your bell becomes the Liberty Bell, but that crack just shattered it, and you're left with whatever you're looking at on the sidewalk. I mean, it's there.
It's a big deal for deck design because before, if you figure this game is over in maybe 5 to 7 turns on the average, maybe I'll get to 9. You're looking at how do you make a deck that's going to combo the right cards in there to be able to be the most effective or to do the most burst or to trick your opponent into thinking they're going to do a lot of burst but then survive through it and counter hit and that's it. When you have a game that you know is going to go 10 to 12, all of a sudden it matters more how the mana efficiency cards go. It matters more like, am I going to fit my hero power in? Am I going to play a 5 card and then a 4 card and not have enough mana left for a hero power because that's 2 and I need 1? Those kinds of questions, which weren't as relevant before, when you have those couple of extra turns, have enough of an effect where you're willing to make a couple of card changes to be like, oh, how does this best fit in? And then the whole meta shifts accordingly.
And if you're going to bring up hero cards and how that fits into the way you play your game and the way you compose your deck, how do we not bring up Inspire?
Yeah.
Watching Inspire as a mechanic and even trying to figure out how it works, I wouldn't even say even just Inspire, but one of the neat things that Inspire has done in the Grand Tournament is that regardless of whether or not you use Inspire cards, it's made you as a player pay attention to where fitting your hero power in can be more efficient. And I've seen that Justicar has helped that as well.
Yeah,
you know what I would say? It's not even how much you use your hero power or how you use it. It's how your opponent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that game that started off this cast where we had even for all that we both got messed up in there watching the armor tally up there. That's part of what makes a big difference for my deck. Because before I was like, okay, hero power is useful, and it still is. But now I have to that's part of the way my deck works is where is hero power relevant? One of the things that I had to consider while making my deck was you had a great suggestion, which was to use the Garrison Commander. You can use your hero power twice a turn when you have that card in there. It turned out in my deck that it was overkill. If I was in a place to be able to use hero power on a regular basis, it gave me more armor than I needed, and the Garrison Commander took a spot where I could have used a more offensive card or could have made a card that was a bigger target of itself.
And that's
which
a
is not
prime
what I
example, kind of what we were talking about earlier. Is it not? Where it's, like this card seems like it fit. It just makes sense, but the synergy is not there. Put in, say, a Neotron instead. Put in, I don't know, whatever card you put in. It's like, this one on paper looks like it'd make the most goddamn sense. I can get 8 armor instead of 4 armor a turn.
Justicar and Garrison Commander sounds amazing.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, double your hero power and twice a turn? That's amazing. And it's entirely possible that for a different class, it could be. It could be a really nice way to do some burst damage right off the bat.
Oh, for Lock it is.
Yeah,
because you combo with there's actually a deck. It's like a really weird hand lock, but it is sort of win condition. But it's where you play Justicar, and then no, it's not. It's not. You play
not Discard. I'm sorry.
You play Justicar, so you take no damage from your hero power, and then you play Garrison Commander, and then you play the new Warlock Legendary, where every card you get from your hero power costs 0. So you get You get 2 0 cost cards each turn.
Wow, that's like a whole. That's like turbo hand lock or something.
Yeah,
that sounds rude.
So that's like it's really win condition, but like,
Yeah. So that's a great example. Like, there's a good combo that's neat there, but it's like, it's almost like a weird kind of like hand aggro. It's like you just throw cards at them like crazy until like the magic stops, but. For a warrior, it was like, look, if you're in a position where you can play Garrison Commander and put a bunch of armor on, that's just not the same as, say, being a mage, where you've already played Justicar, you're doing 2 damage a turn, now you're pumping out 4 damage a turn just out of your hands.
Drake down, now you have him down, now you're just going
crap everywhere.
Boosh. You're like Goku pumping him out.
Yeah. So in a mage deck, I could see that happening as a total, like, as a technique. That'd be interesting to build a mage deck around something like that. For a warrior deck, it was on paper, it made sense. In practice, it was a synergy that didn't actually move the deck forward.
All right, well, guys, we're coming up on that witching hour. Original.
Yeah.
What you got to close it out, my friend?
Warrior and Warlock are the best 2 classes in the game.
Okay. Rise, do you refute that or do you agree?
I don't know about the best classes in the game.
Oh, the funnest. I don't know. More fun.
They're a ton of fun, I will say that. The Warrior's pretty amazing right now, but I think for me the bigger deal is we're finally, it's a month out of TGT, and we're finally starting to see the subtle details come out of being able to find where the synergies are, the little tricks that make a big difference, especially now as we've seen the first blush, as the Secret Pally's shine is starting to wear off, and as the new variation on Face Hunter is settling down, we're starting to see the little things here. When it comes to doing the deck building, net deck it, find something that's awesome, and then look for the little variations that would change, that would totally put a deck over the top in the current sediment layer that you're playing in.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so I guess I'll throw this out. Follow Original at OHRIGINALX. Follow Rise at Hey Rise, BIS Nation at BIS Nation. Yeah, I guess it doesn't matter about anything else. You guys know where to find us. Rise Original, thank you for joining on the cast. As always, I had a really great time, and I'm excited to play some games afterwards.
Yeah!
Always a pleasure.
All right, stream is done.